January 17, 1893. Honolulu, Hawaii. It was hot. Too quiet. Inside Iolani Palace, Queen Liliʻuokalani stood alone. Outside, rifles clicked. Boots marched. American flags were already flying. They said they came in peace. But now her throne was gone. Her kingdom stolen. And the queen was a prisoner in her own palace. This wasn't just a takeover. It was the death of a nation. The cries of her people echoed across the islands. But the world stayed silent. What really happened that day? Why did America help overthrow a peaceful queen? And why did no one stop it? This is the heartbreaking true story of Hawaii's last monarch. Watch to the end, and subscribe now to Unbelievable True Story. Because some truths were buried with the crown. Honolulu, Hawaii. January 17, 1893. The wind was warm, but the air felt frozen. Inside the grand halls of Iolani Palace, Queen Liliʻuokalani stood by the window. Her hands were calm. But her soul was breaking. Outside, boots hit the ground. Rifles loaded. Flags changed. And just like that, her kingdom was no longer hers. But how did it come to this? Long before the rifles. Before the betrayal. There was hope. Lydia Liliʻuokalani Waiwihai Kamakiha was born on September 2, 1838, in Honolulu. She wasn't born a queen. But the stars had already whispered her name. Hawaii was still a kingdom. Still proud. Still full of chants, hula, and kings who spoke to volcanoes. She grew up surrounded by the smell of ocean salt and fresh pikake flowers. She sang. She prayed. She studied. She was sent to the royal school, founded by missionaries to shape Hawaiian royals in the Western style. She learned English. Learned law. Learned how Americans thought. But she never stopped dreaming in Hawaiian. In 1874, her brother, David Kalakaua, became king. They called him the Merry Monarch. He brought back hula. He built the Grand Iolani Palace, decorated with chandeliers, telephones, and European gold. But beneath the beauty, there was fear. American sugar planters were everywhere. Powerful. Rich. Hungry. They needed Hawaii for trade. For military bases. For America's westward march across the Pacific. And King Kalakaua. He signed treaties to protect peace, but gave away control. In 1887, everything changed. A group of mostly white businessmen and lawyers, many from America, stormed the palace with armed men. They forced King Kalakaua to sign a new constitution at gunpoint. They called it the Bayonet Constitution. Because that's what was pressed to his chest. It stripped the king of real power. It gave voting rights only to landowners, mostly rich white men. Native Hawaiians were pushed to the sidelines. And the queen? She wasn't queen yet. But she watched. And remembered. In 1891, King Kalakaua died while visiting California. His body returned to Honolulu in a coffin wrapped in a Hawaiian flag. Liliʻuokalani became Hawaii's first and only reigning queen. The palace was silent. The kingdom mourned. But Liliʻuokalani stood tall. Strong. Ready. She promised her people something simple. I will give you back what was stolen. That meant one thing, a new constitution. The queen gathered her closest advisors. She wrote a new constitution to restore the monarchy's power, bring back the vote to native Hawaiians, undo the bayonet betrayal. It was peaceful. Lawful. Hopeful. But to the businessmen, it was war. They panicked. They called her dangerous. They whispered to U.S. officials. She's going to ruin us. She has to go. They formed a secret group called the Committee of Safety. And they had friends, deep-pocketed ones, in Washington, D.C. And more importantly, they had guns. On January 14, 1893, the Queen met with her ministers. She was ready to announce the new constitution. Outside, loyal Hawaiians gathered in the thousands. They chanted her name. They believed this was their moment. Their breath back. But her ministers grew pale. Shaking. They said, "If you sign this, there will be war." The Queen stood frozen. Heart pounding. Words trapped. And in that moment, she chose patience over fire. She said, "Tell my people I will wait, until the right time." But the planters didn't wait. Just 3 days later, the Committee of Safety made its move. They sent a letter to U.S. Minister John L. Stevens, claiming Hawaiians were in danger from the Queen. It was a lie. But Stevens didn't wait for truth. He ordered U.S. Marines from the USS Boston to march into Honolulu. No shots were fired. But that wasn't peace, it was a warning. The Queen watched from her palace window as foreign soldiers took her streets. She knew. The storm had come. In her private quarters, the Queen lit a candle. She looked at her royal documents, her family crest, her father's crown, her nation's history. She wrote a single line in her diary that night. "I yield to the superior force of the United States of America." She never gave up her belief. But she gave up her throne, to save her people from bloodshed. And when dawn came, the Queen of Hawaii was no longer queen. January 17, 1893. Honolulu, Hawaii. Queen Liliʻuokalani stood at the window of Iolani Palace. Her eyes didn't blink. Her heart didn't beat fast. Because it had already shattered. Across the city, U.S. Marines marched silently through the streets. Bayonets shining in the sun. Boots crushing the red dirt. Behind them, white men in suits smiled. They weren't soldiers. They were businessmen. Sugar barons. Missionaries' sons. But today, they were taking a kingdom. Days before, the USS Boston, a U.S. Navy ship, docked at Honolulu Harbor. On board, over 160 heavily armed U.S. Marines. They were told they were protecting American lives. But no Americans were in danger. The Queen had ordered peace. There was no uprising. No war. Still, the Marines were given a mission. Secure government buildings. Protect American interests. They marched through the city in formation. No gunfire. No screams. Just silence. That silence was louder than war. At 2:30 p.m., inside a government building just a few blocks from the palace, Sanford B. Dole and other members of the Committee of Safety made their move. They stood before a small crowd and declared, "The monarchy is hereby overthrown. We proclaim the provisional government of Hawaii. No vote. No law. Just a piece of paper, and a foreign army behind it." The provisional government sent word to the Queen. "Step down, or violence will follow." In the palace, Queen Liliʻuokalani gathered her closest advisors. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply asked, "What would protect my people?" If she resisted, blood would run through the streets of Honolulu. If she surrendered, her throne would vanish forever. In the end, she chose her people. She signed a document under protest, writing, "I yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representatives." She still believed in justice. She still believed America would do the right thing. But America never did. By sunset, the Hawaiian flag was lowered from the palace. The royal crest was taken down. And the stars and stripes flew in its place. People wept in the streets. Native Hawaiians knelt and cried. Elders stood still, watching 1,000 years of kingdom history vanish in a single day. The palace, once alive with music, chants, and royal feasts, now echoed with silence and foreign boots. And the queen? She sat alone in her chamber, wearing black, mourning a nation still breathing, but no longer free. Back in Washington, D.C., President Benjamin Harrison supported the annexation. He was ready to sign off on the provisional government's request to make Hawaii part of the U.S. But when President Grover Cleveland took office weeks later, everything paused. Cleveland was shocked. He ordered an investigation, the Blunt Report, which revealed the truth. The overthrow was illegal. The Queen was peaceful. The U.S. Marines had no right to interfere. Cleveland asked that the monarchy be restored. But the provisional government, now led by Sanford Dole, said no. They ignored the president. They refused to return the throne. And no one stopped them. For the next 5 years, Queen Liliʻuokalani lived in her palace, under watch, stripped of power. She prayed. She wrote songs. She waited for America to fix the mistake. But it never came. Instead, in 1898, under President William McKinley, Congress passed the Newlands Resolution. Hawaii was officially annexed. No vote from the people. No consent. Just ink and silence. And the Queen? She wrote in her journal. It had not entered into our hearts to believe that these friends and allies would betray us so cruelly. After the overthrow, Native Hawaiians signed a massive petition, over 21,000 names, begging Congress not to annex Hawaii. They marched. They wrote letters. They believed the Queen would be restored. But Washington turned its back. The provisional government became the Republic of Hawaii. And eventually, the Territory of Hawaii. By the time Hawaii became a U.S. state in 1959, most of the island's history had been rewritten. But the truth was never forgotten. Honolulu. March 1895. 6:45 a.m. Heavy boots echoed through the halls of Iolani Palace. Doors slammed open. Soldiers whispered orders. And Queen Liliʻuokalani was placed under arrest. Not as royalty. Not even as a citizen. But as a prisoner. No trial. No jury. Just bars, and silence. The former Queen of Hawaii was now locked inside a room in her own palace. Alone. 2 years had passed since the coup. But the people had not forgotten. In January 1895, a group of native Hawaiians, loyal to the monarchy, rose up in rebellion. It was called the Wilcox Rebellion, led by Royalist Robert William Wilcox. Armed with old rifles and deep love for their queen, they tried to take back the kingdom. They wanted one thing, restore the throne. But the provisional government struck back quickly. The rebels were outgunned. Outnumbered. Captured. And the government needed someone to blame. Someone to punish. Someone who still wore a crown in her heart. On March 1, 1895, Queen Liliʻuokalani was arrested. They said she had knowledge of the rebellion. They said weapons were found buried in her garden. But there was no proof she planned anything. Still, they took her anyway. Not to a prison. But to a room in the palace she once ruled from. The Blue Room, once filled with royal meetings and laughter, was now a jail. She was not allowed visitors. She was not allowed to leave. She was watched day and night by guards. And she was told, confess, or stay here forever. Days passed. Then weeks. Her health began to fail. Her spirit did not. But her friends, those who had fought for her, were being tortured. Some were even sentenced to death. To save them, Queen Liliʻuokalani agreed to sign a document. It said she formally abdicated the throne. It said she gave up all claims to power. It said she surrendered. But it was not true. She later wrote, "I signed that document under duress. They promised to spare my people. I would have given my life if I thought it would save theirs. They didn't just take her crown. They made her sign it away." Trapped inside her room, surrounded by guards, Queen Liliʻuokalani did something unexpected. She wrote music. On scraps of paper. In the silence of night. With nothing but memory and grief. One of her most famous songs was born behind those locked doors. Kualoha o Kahaku, the Queen's Prayer. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was gentle, and full of love. Your peace be with you, my love be with you, until we meet again. Even in chains, she chose kindness. After 8 months, Liliʻuokalani was released. But she was never the same. She returned to her home, not the palace, but a small residence nearby. Iolani Palace, once the heart of a living kingdom, was stripped of furniture. Its thrones removed. Its history erased. Tourists walked through the halls where kings had danced. And schoolchildren were taught that Hawaii had always belonged to America. But the Queen knew better. She remembered everything. She never stopped writing. Never stopped mourning. And never stopped being royal. For the rest of her life, Liliʻuokalani wore black. A symbol of mourning, for her family, for her people, for her nation. She petitioned the U.S. government for justice again and again. She went to Washington, D.C. She spoke to senators. She told them, "What has been done cannot be undone. But justice still lives." They ignored her. But they could not erase her. Her image was everywhere. In paintings. In songs. In the faces of her people. She was no longer a ruler. But she had become something even stronger, a symbol. November 11, 1917 a.m. Honolulu, Hawaii. The bell of Kauiahaio Church rang once. Then again. Then 60 more times. One chime for each year of her life. Outside, thousands gathered in silence. Some wept. Some sang. All came to say goodbye to the woman who once wore Hawaii's crown. Queen Liliʻuokalani was dead. But the nation she gave her life to, wasn't ready to let her go. She passed away in her bed at Washington Place, her private residence. The same place she once fled to for safety. The same place she wrote her songs of sorrow. Doctors said it was complications from a stroke. But those who loved her believed she died from something deeper. A broken heart that never healed. A spirit crushed by betrayal. A queen who lived in exile, on her own land. Her body was placed in state at Kauiahaio Church, where Hawaiian kings and queens had worshipped for generations. Dressed in black satin. Her hair neatly braided. Her hands gently folded over her chest. And draped over her, the flag of the Hawaiian kingdom. Outside, the people waited for hours. Some walked miles barefoot to reach her. Mothers held children on their shoulders. Old men sang the ancient chants one last time. When the doors opened, over 20,000 people walked past her coffin. They whispered prayers. Left lays. Cried in silence. Even those who weren't born when she ruled, cried like they had known her their whole lives. On November 18, a procession began. The Queen's coffin, carried on a koa wood bier, was led through the streets of Honolulu. Behind her, hula dancers, priests, school children, and elders. All dressed in black. They walked to Mauna Ela, the royal mausoleum. The resting place of Hawaiian royalty. People lined the sidewalks, singing softly. Old women dropped white flower petals onto the road. Men removed their hats and wept openly. And as the coffin passed Iolani Palace, the people stopped. Turned. and bowed. Even in death, she was their queen. After her death, the world moved on. But Hawaii did not forget. Tourists came by boat. Hotels rose along Waikiki. Sugar plantations boomed. To outsiders, Hawaii was paradise. But to the Kanaka Maoli, native Hawaiians, it was something else. A stolen home. A buried history. A wound left open. Children were told not to speak Hawaiian in school. Ancient chants and dances were banned. Even Queen Liliʻuokalani's music was labeled old-fashioned. The palace became a museum. The flag of the Hawaiian kingdom was folded away. But deep inside the people, her voice still echoed. Queen Liliʻuokalani left behind more than a story. She left a soundtrack. She wrote over 150 songs and chants during her life, many from her time in captivity. The most famous. Aloha Oe, Farewell to Thee. A song of love, loss, and hope. Today, it's played at graduations, funerals, even state ceremonies. But few know it was written by a queen mourning her people. Every time the chorus is sung, her spirit rises. For nearly a century, the world forgot what was done. But the Hawaiian people never did. In the 1970s, a cultural movement began, the Hawaiian Renaissance. Children began learning the language again. Old chants were taught in schools. Her music was played in public. Activists began demanding truth. They uncovered documents. They told the story of the overthrow. In 1993, on the 100th anniversary of the coup, something remarkable happened. The U.S. government issued an official apology. The overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii occurred with the active participation of agents and citizens of the United States. The native Hawaiian people never directly relinquished their claims to their inherent sovereignty. The Queen's story was finally told. But justice? Still unfinished. This is not a legend. This is the documented truth of what happened to Queen Liliʻuokalani, and to the Hawaiian kingdom. It's written in government records. It's in her own words. It's carved into the hearts of her people. They tried to bury her legacy. But it never left. Because when a nation is stolen, its truth waits in silence until someone listens. Today. Honolulu, Hawaii. Beneath the blue skies and white sand. Beneath the tiki torches and luxury hotels. Beneath the ukuleles and smiling hula girls. Something still burns. It's not in the tourist maps. Not in the hotel brochures. But it's there. A quiet heartbeat. A whispered chant. A crown that never truly disappeared. But the story is not over. Hawaii became the 50th U.S. state in 1959. But to many native Hawaiians, it never felt like a choice. No vote from the kingdom. No treaty signed. No formal surrender. Only a military-backed overthrow. And an annexation that historians now admit was likely illegal. If a crown is stolen and hidden, is it still a crown? In 1993, President Bill Clinton signed the Apology Resolution. It admitted U.S. wrongdoing. It acknowledged the overthrow was illegal. But it offered no restitution. No land back. No return of sovereignty. Still, for many Hawaiians, it was proof. Proof that the kingdom wasn't destroyed. Just buried. Today, the descendants of Hawaii's royal families still walk the islands. They don't wear gold. They don't sit on thrones. But they carry the blood of chiefs. Of warriors. Of queens like Liliʻuokalani. Names like Abigail Kinoiki Kekaulike Kawananakoa, often called the last Hawaiian princess. Others live quietly, working as teachers, healers, activists. Some still claim legal titles. Others focus on cultural rebirth. But none have forgotten the story. Because they are the story. All across Hawaii, movements have grown. Protect Mauna Kea. Hawaiian Kingdom Government. Kanaka Maoli Independence. Some demand full independence. Others ask for federal recognition like a Native American nation. Some simply want the truth taught in schools. And others say, the kingdom still exists. It was never lawfully ended. Legally, it's complex. Emotionally, it's crystal clear. The Hawaiian people never gave up. In the 1980s, fewer than 2,000 people spoke Native Hawaiian fluently. Today, thanks to immersion schools and cultural programs, that number is rising. Hula, once banned, is now taught with sacred precision. Chants once whispered are now shouted in protest and praise. Queen Liliʻuokalani's songs are played at concerts, in classrooms, and at protests. And on the grounds of her former palace. They still raise the kingdom's flag. Red, white, blue. 8 stripes for 8 islands. A symbol not of defeat, but defiance. Iolani Palace is no longer silent. It is the only royal palace in the United States. But to Hawaiians, it's not just a museum. It is a witness. A place where a queen once ruled. Then was imprisoned. Then remembered. Visitors walk through its halls and see the old throne. The feathered cloaks. The handwritten letters from Liliʻuokalani. They listen to her voice in recordings. They read her diary. And they ask, how could this happen? And more haunting still. Could it happen again? Liliʻuokalani never had children. Her crown never passed. But what she left behind was something deeper than blood. A spirit of resistance. A memory that refuses to die. A song that still floats on island winds. She said, you may take my kingdom, but you will never take my love for my people. She was right. In 1917, the world watched a queen die. In 2025, her songs are still sung. Her flag is still raised. Her palace still stands. And her people, though scattered, hurt, and silenced, are still here. Rising. Demanding. Remembering. Because a crown stolen is not a crown forgotten. This is not a legend. Not a fairy tale. Not an ancient myth. This is the real, documented truth of Queen Liliʻuokalani, and the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom. It's a story of betrayal. Of silence. And of a quiet rebellion still unfolding today. You can read her letters. You can visit her palace. You can hear her music with your own ears. Every part of this story is true. Today, at sunset, you can still stand in front of Iolani Palace. You'll hear traffic. Tourists. Laughter. But if you listen closely, you might hear it too. A whisper in the wind. A song through the palm trees. The Queen's voice. Aloha Oi. Until we meet again. Have you heard this story before? Do you think Hawaii was ever truly part of the United States? What would you have done if it was your queen? Your kingdom? Would you have stayed silent? If this story moved you, if it shocked you, if it stayed with you. Subscribe now to Unbelievable True Story. Because every week, we uncover real stories the world tried to erase. And next week, the next truth might be even closer to home. Candle watch the next video on your screen, or dive into our full playlist of real mysteries, betrayals, and legends. The next one might be even more unbelievable.